Keto diet versus paleo diet. Are they the same thing? Are they fads? How are they different? We're going to talk about all these principles so that you can decide if it's something that you want to give a try, and you can understand when and if that would be a good idea. Coming right up. So what is the paleo diet? It is a philosophy of how humans have eaten through the history of human existence. So the earliest humanoids came around about 2 million years ago, the Homo erectus. And then Homo sapiens, the latest version of human, came around 250,000 years ago. And most researchers in paleontology and human evolution, they agree that there is very, very little difference between the DNA of the Homo sapiens 250,000 years ago and your DNA today. So the idea then is that whatever they ate would be the most appropriate type of food for us to eat today. And why might one want to make that argument? Because if you have the same DNA as they did, the DNA codes for enzymes. And enzymes are what you have in your body. There is some enzymes in food, and you produce a lot of the rest in your body that break down the food. And different types of food require different types of enzymes. You can't eat the same thing that a cow eats because you don't have those enzymes. You don't have those bacterial cultures. So an enzyme is a catalyst. It is something that fits into specific molecules and help us break down and metabolize that food. So if your ancestors had a certain set of DNA to code for a certain type of enzymes, then it would make a lot of sense that you would be suitable for the same type of food. So that is the idea behind the paleo diet. So what would be okay to eat on the paleo diet then? Well, anything that they had access to, such as meat, fish, poultry, anything that they could pull out of the ocean, anything that they could catch and kill and eat would be all right. They also probably had access to some fruits and some vegetables, at least seasonally. They probably could catch, pick, find some eggs, and they could also pick nuts and seeds that they found. They could dig up some roots, some things that are called tubers, similar to sweet potato and potato, early versions of those things. So all of those things would be available to our ancestors, and that's the argument is that that's what we should eat exclusively. What they said no to categorically is grain, because your ancestors before 10,000 years ago, they had no grain available to them. They had no legumes, they had no beans, no corn. Well, corn is actually a grain, but beans and green beans, soybeans, black beans, etc., peanuts, all of those are legumes, and your ancestors did not have access to them, and therefore we shouldn't eat them. They also said that there was no organized form of dairy. We didn't farm animals. We didn't domesticate animals until later. So even if you could catch an occasional animal and get a little dairy, there was nothing regular about that. Potatoes are a more modern thing, and obviously they had no processed sugar, no processed foods, no food additives. They had no vegetable oils, no seed oils, no nut oils, none of that. So this, because it wasn't available, the principle of the paleo diet says that you should cut this out 100%. And it also makes a lot of sense when you look at what people develop the most allergies to. The absolute top allergies today are wheat, soy, and dairy. And it's not just the fact that it's those foods, but it's how they've been processed and how they've changed and how they've been refined. So the paleo diet also advocates, of course, that we should eat it in its most original form. So how does that then compare to the keto diet? Well, let's look at the breakdown of macronutrients. So they've done a lot of research on this, and they looked at hundreds of different primitive populations and where they lived and their ancestors and what they were likely to eat and so forth. And they came up with the numbers that our ancestors on average probably ate around 39-40% fat, 38-40% protein, so really, really close, and about 23% carbs. So basically, twice as much calories from fat and protein as they did from carbs. So it's in essence a low carb diet. It doesn't have to be, but because you cut out the grains and legumes and the sugar and the processed food, it sort of becomes a low carb. But you could, during certain times, if you found a lot of fruit and a lot of roots and things like that, then it could develop into a more moderate carbohydrate diet. But then they say it also depended on where you lived. So in the north, where it was colder, fewer fruits, a shorter growing season, then they would rely less on carbohydrate, probably as little as 10%, and they would rely more on fishing. So with fishing and hunting seals and fat fish and things like that, they would get probably a full 60% of their calories from fat. On the other hand, if you lived in the tropics, then you would have more fruits, more vegetables, longer seasons and so forth. So you might have actually 40%. So you'd be a moderate, almost a high carbohydrate diet. And again, of course, there would be no processed sugars or food in that. Compared to the keto diet then, the keto diet is pretty close to what they would eat in the north. So in a sense, some versions of the paleo diet would actually be a keto diet. But the keto diet, as we've talked about before, it's not an idea. It's a physiological principle. It's about how do you cut the carbs so low that your body gets into a state of ketosis. So it's an observation. It's changing your macronutrients to the point where your body starts burning fat. So some advocates of the keto diet, they say, well, as long as you cut the carbs down and get into ketosis, it doesn't matter what you eat. You could eat processed foods, don't have to eat vegetables, etc., etc. And I don't share that point of view. I think it still matters if you want to be healthy long term. But as far as the strict keto principle, then it doesn't matter, because when you're in ketosis, you're in ketosis. So it's a physiological principle. It's about changing your lifestyle until something happens in your body to where you start burning fat, and a byproduct of fat burning is ketones. So when you can measure ketones in your body, you have achieved the objective and you are in ketosis and you are on a ketogenic diet regardless of what type of food you're eating. And again, during certain times, the paleo diet would turn into the keto diet. If we look at it a little bit further, and now we think about, well, we didn't have refrigerators and worldwide global commerce and distribution of food, so there was a lot of variation from day to day and between the seasons. So our ancestors had certain periods of feasting and certain periods of famine. And during the feasting, they were probably low to moderate carbohydrate, and when there wasn't so much food around, then they were low carb or probably keto for long periods of time. And when they didn't have food for a couple of days, well, guess what? They were fasting intermittently. So I have to laugh anytime someone calls these things a fad diet, because the definition of fad means it's of short duration. It's an idea someone gets excited about, And a lot of people try it and then it kind of fades away. And nothing could be further from the truth, because these things are not fads. This is how humans have eaten for as long as we have existed. Every animal on the planet are in a feast or famine situation because the food supply isn't constant. So for certain times, we're all in keto and intermittent fasting. So there's nothing new about it. It is the way we're supposed to function. Humans do extremely well missing a few meals, but we have no defense against 6 meals a day. Your body is not designed to cope with 6 meals a day, and the results are disastrous for most people. So we want to understand the differences, that the paleo diet is an historical hypothesis. It's an idea that let's eat the way that they did. And the keto diet is a physiological principle. It says eat low enough carbs, cut the carbs enough back that you get into a state of ketosis. And sometimes they have two different origins. The roots of why we do them are completely different, but sometimes they end up being the same thing because of the reasons that we talked about. That because we cut out most of the high carb foods, it becomes a low carb diet, and because there was sometimes feast and famine, then they sometimes became the keto diet. But then some people, they say that, oh well, because I believe this is the way it is, I'm going to turn it into my religion. So some people look at the paleo diet and they say that, oh, absolutely, with no exceptions, under no circumstances should you ever have anything outside of that because it's unnatural. And I don't buy that all the way. I think the paleo idea is a fantastic foundation, and I base everything that I do on that. I think our physiology has developed. I think we need to look not only at the foods that we ate, but we need to look at the sleep cycles and our activity levels and a lot of different things. How we respond to stress, that our whole stress response system developed to give us survival advantage. We were supposed to have a fight-flight response to run away from a bear, and we had an all-out sympathetic fight-flight response, and then we found our safety in a cave or in a tree, and then our bodies could settle down. So there was large differences between the fight-flight and the relaxation. Whereas today, our stress is very different. So we're not living the way that our bodies were designed for. We have a lot of low-grade stress that keeps going hour after hour after hour. We sit in front of computers with deadlines. We sit in traffic. We have arguments. We watch the news. We listen to politics. We have all these little things that set off stress responses, and we're not designed for those type of things. So I think this is a great foundation. The paleo diet is a great place to start, but I don't think that is necessarily 100% the law just because of that. I think a lot of people do well on certain grains. I think organic corn in moderation. I think organic oats for some people. I think brown rice in moderation. If you're not sensitive to it, if you're not insulin resistant, I think that can be a reasonably good food for that person. But if you are very insulin resistant, then all of these things are also going to trigger insulin at a much too high level. I think also, based on testing and based on clinical results, that dairy is okay for most people, but we have to look at the source of the dairy, the quality of the dairy. Is this grass-fed, and has it been pasteurized? And the more we can find it in its original form, the more likely that it's good for you. Something like skimmed pasteurized milk, I wouldn't want for my worst enemy. I think that's a horrendous food. Based on our testing in our office, we have never found a person that agrees with pasteurized skim milk, but we have the majority of people doing well on grass-fed butter and sour cream and raw cheese and things like that. And by the same token, some people turn the keto diet into a religion and say that, oh, well, when I went into ketosis, I felt the best I ever had. It changed my life, so that must be the best diet for me. I'm going to stick to that no matter what. I don't care what I eat. As long as I'm in ketosis, I'll be fine. And that's because they were insulin resistant, they were toxic with sugar, and when they cut it out, they gave their body a chance to recover and find some sort of balance. But it doesn't mean that that is the optimal diet for them forever. We need to understand where our origins are. According to the Paleo principle, we need to understand where low carb and keto and low to moderate carb diets fit in based on our health goals and our weight and our insulin resistance. So I think everyone should look hard at the paleo diet to get a good foundation, to understand where our roots are, that those people ate a certain type of food and that that food was always whole and unprocessed. And I think that should be 80 to 90% of the food for almost everybody. Then I think you need to understand where you are as far as insulin resistance, blood sugar, A1C, etc., and where you need to be on the carbohydrate scale. That if you're very insulin resistant, then you probably need to do keto for a while. Probably, and if not keto, at least very low carb combined with intermittent fasting and exercise and stress modification behavior and so forth. So it's what this channel is all about. It's learning these principles so that you can take the best from each area and understand how it fits to you. Because there is no one size fits all. We have to start understanding what the modern world has changed, what it has done to us, so that we can learn and change and try things that will work for us. If you enjoy this kind of content and you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss anything. And as always, share this content with as many people as you can, because that way you can help them live a better life as well. Thanks for watching.